What is going on, YouTube? It's Tyler from Mission VR, where it's my mission to bring you guys good quality VR content. So today's video, we are going to be taking a look at whether virtual reality shooters is the best genre overall for virtual reality games. And I know that's kind of a loaded question to some extent, but there's some really interesting points to go both for and against, and we're going to be talking about the arguments on both sides here. So make sure you guys do drop a like on this video, and I want to hear from you in the comments section below what your overall thought process is whether you think virtual reality shooters are the best genre, or if you would prefer more games from other genres to be as maybe your favorite or widely accepted as the favorite. Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button, hit that like button, and let's go ahead and hop on into this video. Okay guys, so first up, we are going to argue for that the best genre of virtual reality games is shooters, and there's some good points on here that you could use in any argument if you were going to actually make this argument. And the first one being guns. We all love guns. For whatever reason, we are captivated by guns. And, I'm sure that's pretty prevalent throughout your childhood. You've played a lot of shooters, you've, played with Nerf guns, played paintball, played airsoft. For whatever reason, your favorite subject in class was most likely history because you enjoyed learning about the wars. If you're like me, that is me. And for whatever reason, guns just captivate us. And I think that, one of the things we like about guns is there's just so many different types of guns. And if you're comparing that to maybe a melee game, yeah, there's many different types of swords, but ultimately they all kind of are what they are, swords. Where the guns come in a large variety. You have automatic guns, you have big guns like tank guns, laser guns, sniper rifles, bazookas. There's a lot of different types of guns, and I think that captivates us, especially when you're playing a game, in virtual reality. You're going to be able to picking up handguns to, all these other submachine guns, heavy machine guns. There's a lot of variety in things you're picking up, where again, yes, there is variety in games that have swords and things, but it just isn't quite the same feeling as picking up a gun of different types and really learning how to play with different guns. So yes, there's a lot of different play styles with guns, and again, not saying there isn't with melee, but I just feel that there is definitely more options to use whenever you have guns involved. So our second point would be game developers. So as a game dev, it's got to be a hell of a lot easier to balance a shooter game than it is a melee combat game, just because already in virtual reality we see that there isn't a ton of melee combat games, especially there's almost no PvP games. There's one that I know of, but it's very, very difficult to balance that, because you've got to figure out a way to, in PvP it's probably a little bit easier because all you have to do is balance the weapons, but with, any type of story-based game where there's AI involved, that AI has to be, somewhat comparable to make the game challenging or fun. And obviously, if you've ever played Blade and Sorcery, you would know that the AI is very terrible, and you can outsmart it and outmaneuver it with your sword relatively quickly, which takes the skill out of the game. Now, I'm not saying the game isn't fun. There's a lot of fun that you can have in that game, feeling kind of like you are unstoppable. But if you were, really to look at these two games, there's two genres, you really have to say that shooters, it's a lot easier for AI to learn to shoot back at you and hide behind cover than it is for an AI to learn an entire move set of a weapon and be able to adequately challenge you without you hitting them multiple times, and not killing them, which I think brings us into really our next point, which is realism. And, it's a lot easier for a game dev, or just in general for a shooter to be a little more realistic than, say, a melee combat game. And that just is because it's easier to balance that, especially with where the current state of technology is at. Now, I'm not saying that at some point in the future that, computer programmed players can be excellent at blocking your attacks and putting up a good fight in a melee situation, but it's just overall a lot easier to program soldiers to shoot back at you and do that stuff. And that in that realism sense, most melee games really aren't realistic in VR so far. You look at Until You Fall. I mean, I hit the knight, 10 times before I break its guard. And, the realism side of things, typically, somebody wearing armor, if you hit them in the right spot, it'd kill them instantly. And I think that, again, a lot of times, I'm not saying every game we strive for has to be realistic, but shooters tend to have a little bit more of that realism vibe, which I think definitely draws in a larger crowd of people. And lastly, so we have one more point here that I really want to make, and that is the relatability and the just overall control of these two games. And really, when it comes to control, you don't have to swing your arms around or, do a bunch of other things playing a shooter game. It's a lot more casual, and it appeals to a larger, audience than, puzzle games or something like that. And yeah, you don't have to move as much while playing a shooter. If you have a smaller play space, this is a benefit to a shooter over a melee combat game. You don't have to worry about hitting your hand off of, the dresser or the door or the wall. Playing a shooter, more or less you could stay in the same place, where if you're playing a game like Until You Fall, you are moving around, you're dodging, and sometimes you end up lost in your play space, and you end up smashing your hand off of a wall or a fan, or you name it. Yeah, so these are things that happen. Also, in a melee combat game, you look at two-handed weapons, and they're very difficult to control just because there's no weight sensation. And if you were handling a large hammer or something like that, it's going to have a feel to it. And it's going to feel like a lot of times in the weighted system they have, it drags behind. And this is just something that overall, it's a lot harder to control when it comes to that. And then also, the extra steps of reloading a gun, it just feels really satisfying. Pop a mag out, put a new mag in, get it charged up. It's ultimately, guns have a nice satisfying feel to them in virtual reality, where sometimes, swordplay and other, types of genres can be a little bit clunky, where guns are pretty easy to figure out. And so that lastly brings us to the relatability. And again, most of us today could pick up a firearm and go outside. Most of us have played with Nerf guns, airsoft guns, these things. And, we're able to relate to that, where a lot of us don't have any like formal sword training, or, can't become a wizard if you're playing a fantasy game. Those are things you can't really do in real life. And I think that that's definitely why shooters draw people in, because it's kind of like an alternate relatable universe. Whereas, you becoming a wizard, or, becoming a mystic puzzle solver, those are things that, you do to escape rather than not to relate to. So now we are going to go ahead and give some of the points that maybe you would use to say that, hey, shooters aren't the best genre for virtual reality. And the first one is actually going to key right off of our last one for the last section here, and that is that they aren't relatable typically. I mean, again, you're playing a game like Wizard's Dark Times, and like you can't really relate to that in real life, because I can't conjure fireballs up from my hands and fire them. And I think this is actually one of the strengths to argue that, where, that's the point of me playing a video game. I want to get away. I want to pop myself into a fantasy universe, pop myself into a world like Lone Echo, where I'm up in space solving, whatever storyline. That's the point, that these things aren't as relatable because, we currently don't have the means or capacity to do them. And I think that, a lot of the times this is very exciting. And, I haven't played too many non-shooters that really are set in, modern times, where I'm, driving my car from, a job to a job. I mean, that wouldn't be a fun game, right? The whole point of it is for us to get into that fantasy side of things. And, really you don't have to do that with a shooter. And that's really kind of what brings me to my next point here, is that, typically in a shooter game, you never really have that sensation of, oh, I'm going to escape. Like when I play Elite Dangerous, I'm really on a journey. I'm escaping, my everyday life to go and explore the star systems, to become somebody that I'm not. Really, we're in a shooter, yeah, I'm playing a video game, I'm having a great time, but I'm being a little more competitive. I'm popping myself into the shoes of a warlike environment, and you're never really going to stop and admire a warlike environment like you would maybe, if you're in the Wizard's Dark Times and you're looking up at a magic mountain, or if you're in Elite Dangerous and you come out of hyperspace and you're looking at this beautiful star right in front of you. I mean, those are things that you really just escape your everyday life, where a shooter, like I said, you're put into a war zone. And yeah, sometimes that could be, especially in virtual reality, maybe not all the time you're in a mood to do that. So, and, that also brings me to one more point here, is that, these type of games like Lone Echo, other melee combat games, Blade and Sorcery, games like Elite Dangerous, all these non-shooter genre games, puzzle games, typically they're less competitive than, say, a shooter. So if you are a casual, player, and obviously this has some exceptions, but if you are a casual player that's just really looking to, casually enjoy a good time and not have to worry about your teammates yelling at you, or, just getting crushed and having no chance by somebody who's really good online, these are great games typically for that. I mean, even a game like Until You Fall, that technically you could say is competitive, but you're not playing against anybody. So if you fail a bunch of times, it's, really it's just on you. You're not having to compete against anybody else. So I think that, some of these games are really good, for that side of things. So that brings us to a kind of verdict here. And overall, I think, when it comes to this, how can you pick, a shooters being the best genre in virtual reality when there's just so many other titles that are absolutely fantastic and are able to take you away from, everyday life. Some of these best games I've ever played, Skyrim being in VR, one of the, experience that stuck with me, and then, Elite Dangerous, being able to be a starship pilot. I mean, those are things that, yeah, I wouldn't consider Elite Dangerous a shooter game, absolutely, but it's a fantastic video game. And it's hard to say that shooters are the best genre, but overall I would love to know what you guys think about that. Tell me if shooters are your favorite genre of virtual reality, or if you're more into space exploration, puzzle games, or what you guys are into. I'd love to know about that. And definitely leave that in the comment section. Drop a like on this video and subscribe to my channel. I'm bringing a ton of virtual reality content, and I got some good stuff coming up for you guys, some game reviews and some other things that I've been working on. So be sure to look out for that, and I will see you guys in the next one.